Life and death appear to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through, pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creature source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. Mary Shelley. Hello and welcome to episode 30 actually, of Dark Academia Queen. Today we are going to be discussing the life of possibly one of my favorite authors of all time. I know I say about every author I talk about and poet I talk about on here, but she truly is one of my favorites, and she literally paved the way, like, for me personally into books, especially a gothic genre, especially because I grew up, like, in a very controlled household. And I was a book lover as a kid. Like, that was my escape. It didn't matter what the hell I was going through. All I knew is I could just open a book, escape to that world, and Frankenstein was one of my favorite gothic novels growing up of all time. If you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, also please hit that subscribe button, help a girl out. But now Mary Shelley is best known for her writing of the Gothic novel Frankenstein. Um, and the modern Prometheus, which is considered an early form of science fiction. She also edited and promoted works from her husband, Percy B. Shelley, and her dad was the political philosopher William Goodwin, and her mom was a philosopher and women's rights advocate Mary Wollstonecraft. Her mom died 11 days after giving birth to her, and she was raised by a father who provided her with a rich and informal education. Um, education, encouraging her to adhere to her own anarchist political theories. She was only 4 when her dad married neighbor Mary Jane Clement, and whom Mary um had a troubled relationship with. In 1840, Mary began a romance with one of her father's political followers, Percy B. Shelley, and who was already married. Together, they had with a stepsister, Claire Claremont, and she said that Percy left for France and traveling through Europe. Sounds really messy, if you ask me. Like, messy relationships is all together, like, but anyway, um, but upon their return to England, Mary was pregnant with Percy's child. Over the next 2 years, she and Percy faced a lot of criticism and everything. They were in constant debt, and the death of a prematurely born daughter as well. They married in late 1816 after the suicide of Percy Shelley's first wife, Harriet. And then in 1816, the couple and Mary's stepsister famously spent the summer with Lord Byron and John William Pilardi near Geneva, Switzerland, where Shelley was conceived the idea of her novel Frankenstein. Seems like Lake Geneva was a very influential path for a lot of the authors I've noticed from like my research and everything. But the Shelleys left Britain in 1818 for Italy, where they would spend the second half, where their second and third children died before Shelley gave birth, and her last only surviving child, Percy Florence Shelley. In 1822, her husband drowned while in a sailing boat and sank during their home near Veragero. A year later, Shelley would return to England from that and devoted herself to bringing up her son, a career into a professional author. The last decade of her life was dogged by illness and most likely caused by a brain tumor, would which killed her at the age of 53. And until the 1970s, Shelley was known mainly for her efforts to publish her husband's work in her novel Frankenstein, which would remain widely read and inspired many theatrical and film adaptations. Um, Scholars would have shown an interest in the literary output, particularly in her novels. Studies have lesser known works such as the travel books Rambles in Germany and Italy, and the biographical articles of Dionysius Lardner Cabinet Cyclopedia as well. Support her growing view that Shelley remained a political radical throughout her life. Now, Shelley's work would often argue the cooperation and sympathy, particularly as she practiced by women in the family, that they will always reform civil society. And the views were a direct challenge to the individualistic romance ethos promoted by Percy Shelley and the Enlightenment political theories that articulated by her father, William Goodwin. Let's talk about her life and her career now. Mary was born Mary Wallenstaff Goodwin in Somerstown, England, in 1797, and she was the second child of a feminist philosopher, educator, and writer, and the first child of a philosopher, novelist, and journalist. So you might want to say it was in her genes, right? And Wollstonecraft died of a puerperal fever shortly after Mary was born. Godwin was left to bring up Mary, and along with her older half sister Fanny Imlay, um, Wollstonecraft's child by American Spectator Gilbert Imlay. Now, a year later, Wollstonecraft's death, Godwin published memoirs and the author of A Vindication of Rights of Women, in which he intended to sincere compassionate tribute. However, because this memoir revealed Wollstonecraft's affairs in her illegitimate child that had been seen shocking, Mary Godwin read these memoirs on her mom, and she was brought up to cherish her mother's memory. Her earliest years were happy, and judging from the letters, including William Godwin's housekeeper and nurse, Louisa Jones, but there was debt also, and he cared for a second wife. So in 1801, he married Mary Jane Claremont, who was a well-educated woman of two children of her own, Charles and Claire. Most of Goodwin's family little disliked the new wife, describing her as a quick-tempered and quarrelsome, but Godwin was devoted to her, and the marriage was a success. Mary Godwin, in contrast, came to detest her stepmother, and William Godwin, Godwin's 19th century biographer Charles Keegan Paul later suggested that Mrs. Godwin had favored her own children over Mary Wallenstaff, over those of Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, together, the Godwins stated that they published a firm called M.J. Godwin, which was sold children's books and stationery maps. However, the business did not turn a profit, and that Godwin had forced to borrow substantial sums to keep it going. He continued to borrow to pay off loans income compounded by his difficulties, and by 1809, Godwin's business was forced to close. Now, he would be saved by his debtor's prison by philosophical devotees such as Francis Place, who lent him further money. And though Mary received little formal education, her dad tutored her in a broad range of subjects. He often took the children to educational outings and had access to the library and many intellectuals who visited them, including Romantic poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge and former Vice President of the U.S. Aaron Burr. Godwin also admitted that not educating his children according to Mary Wallenstaff's philosophy, as outlined in the Vindication of the Rights of Women, but nonetheless she received an unusual and advanced education for a girl of her time. She had a governess and a daily tutor, and her father's children books were on her father's books were on Roman and Greek history in manuscript. For 6 months in 1811, she attended a boarding school in Ramsgate, and her father described her at the age of 15 as a singularly bold, somewhat imperious, and active in her mind. In June 1812, Mary's dad sent her away with the dissenting family of radical William Baxter near Dundee, Scotland. Scholars have speculated that she was sent away to her help to remove her from the seamy side of the business, or to introduce her to radical politics. Mary was revealed at the spacious surroundings of Baxter's house in the companionship of his 4 daughters, and that she would return the summer of 1813 for a further stay of 10 months. In the 1831 introduction of Frankenstein, she will recall, I wrote then, but this is a commonplace now, black and white engravings of the church in the background where flowing rivers can be spotted.
Now, who
And
was
two
her
people
husband
are sitting on a
exactly?
bank. Now, on June 26, 1814, Mary declared her love for Percy at Mary Wallenstaff's graveside, well, Krauss, in the churchyard of St. Pancras Old Church. And she may have first met the radical poet in the interval between her two stays in Scotland. Now, by the time she returned home for a second time on March 30th, 1814, Percy had become estranged from his wife and regularly was visiting William Godwin, with whom he agreed to bail out of debt. Percy's radicalism, particularly in his economic views, in which he imbibed from William Godwin's political justice, had alienated him in his wealthy aristocratic family. Percy had difficulty getting success, um, had difficulty gaining access to money until he inherited his estate because his family did not want him wasting it on projects of political justice. And after several months of promises, Shelley announced that he either could not or he would not pay all of Godwin's debt, and Godwin became angry and felt betrayed. Mary and Percy began paying off all of his debt, and they began meeting each other and secretly at her mom's Mary Wallenstoff's grave in the churchyard at St. Pancras Old Church, and they fell in love. She was 16, he was 21, and on June 26, 1814, Shelley and Godwin declared their love for one another, and Shelley announced that he could not hide his abhorrent passion, leading him into a sublime and rapturous movement. So on either that day or the next, Godwin will lose her virginity to Shelley, which tradition claims happened in the churchyard. I don't know if I should be like weirded out by that or like what by that. It's like I don't know. Like feelings on that one. Honestly. But Godwin described herself as attracted to Shelley's wild intellectual and unearthly looks. To Mary's dismay, her father's disapproval, and tried to thwart the relationship and salvage the spotless fame of his daughter. Yeah, because he wouldn't help you pay off your debts, right? And at the same time, Mary learned that Shelley's inability to pay off the father's debts. Mary, who would later write, my excessive and romantic attachment for my father was confused. She saw Percy as an embodiment of her parents' liberal and reformist ideas in the 1790s, particularly Godwin's view that marriage was a repressive monopoly, and that he had argued in 1793 edition Political Justice, but later retracted. On July 28, 1814, the couple would elope and secretly left for France, taking Mary's stepsister Claire Claremont with them. After convincing Mary Jane Godwin, who had pursued them to Colosse, that they did not wish to return, the trio traveled to Paris, and then by donkey, mule, carriage, and foot through France recently ravaged by war, through Switzerland. As they traveled, Mary and Percy read works by Mary Wallenstaff and others. craft and others, and they kept a journal and continued their own writing. In Act Lucarin, lack of money and forced the three to turn back. They traveled down the Rhine by river in the Dutch port of Mosels, arriving at the Graveside Kent on September 13, Gravesend Kent on September 13, 1814. The situation awaiting Mary Godwin in England was fraught with complications, some of which she had not foreseen. Either way, either before or during the journey, she had become pregnant, and she and Percy now found themselves penniless. And Mary's genuine surprise, her dad refused to have anything to do with her. The couple were moved with Claire into lodgings at Somers Town in Nelson Square, and they maintained their intense programming of reading and writing and entered Percy Shelley's friends such as Thomas Jefferson, Hogg, and the writers Thomas Love Peacock. Personally, now Percy Shelley sometimes left home for short periods to dodge predators, and the couple's distraught led them to reveal their pains in these speculations. Pregnant and often ill, Percy Shelley had to cope with Percy's joy at the birth and son and Harriet Shelley in 1814 in their constant outing with Claire Clairmont. And Shelley and Clairmont um, were also almost certainly lovers, which caused them to have jealousy of Godwin's part. Shelley greatly offended Godwin at one point during their walk in the French countryside. He suggested that they both take a plunge into the stream naked, and offended her principles, and she was partly consoled by the visits in Hogg, in which she disliked him at first, and considered him soon considered him a close friend. Now Percy seemed to have wanted Mary Godwin and Hogg to become lovers. Um, Mary did not dismiss the idea, but since the principles that she believed in free love. In practice, however, she only loved Percy, and seemed to have ventured no further than flirting with him. On February 22nd, 1815, she gave birth 2 months premature to a girl who was not expected to survive. The loss of her child led to an acute depression in Mary Godwin, and who was haunted by visions of that day. But she conceived him and recovered him by the summer, with a revival in Percy Shelley's finances after the death of his grandfather. Now, the couple stayed in Torquay and then rented a two-story cottage in Bishopgate on the edge of the Windsor Great Park. Little is known about this period of Mary's life, but her journal from May 1815 to July 1816 is lost. At Bishopsgate, Percy wrote a poem, Alistair, The Spirit of Solitude, and on January 24th, 1816, Mary gave birth to a second child, William, named after her father, and soon nicknamed Will's Mouse, in the novel The Last Man in Windsor of Garden. So, how did Lake Geneva and Frankenstein come about from all of this? In May 1816, Mary, Percy, and their son travel to Geneva with Claire, and they plan to spend the summer with the poet Lord Byron, whose recent love affair with Claire had left her pregnant in a history of 6 weeks tour throughout France, Switzerland, and Germany and Holland. She described a particular desolate landscape in crossing from the France into Switzerland. The party arrived in Geneva on May 14, 1816, where Mary called herself Mrs. Shelley, and Byron joined on May 25th in a young physician, John William Polden, and rented Villa Theodati, close to Lake Geneva in the village of Colony. And Percy rented a smaller building called Mason Chapeau on the waterfront nearby, and they spent their time riding, boating on the lake, and talking. Sitting around a log fire at Byron's villa, the company amused themselves with the German ghost stories which prompted Byron to propose that They each write a ghost story. Unable to think of a story, young Mary became anxious, and during the mid-June evening, the discussions turned to the nature of the principle of life. She began writing as what she assumed to be a short story, but with Percy's and Shelley's encouragement, she expanded into her first novel, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, published in 1818, and she later described that summer in Switzerland as a moment when I first stepped out of my childhood into life. And the story of the writings of Frankenstein has been fictionalized several times and it formed basis on numerous films. Now, it was sometime in 2011 that it was September 2011 that the astronomer Donald Olson, after a visit to Lake Geneva Villa, year in inspecting data and the motion of stars and moons, concluded that her waking dream took place between 2 and 3 a.m. So while her husband Percy encouraged her writing, the extent to Percy's contributes to the novel is unknown and has been argued by readers and critics. She wrote in the preface that her first edition with Percy's work, as far as I can recollect. Now, Charles E. Robinson, editor of the fascinating edition of Frankenstein manuscripts, concluded that Percy's contributions to the work were no more than most publishers' editors and provided now or offset. So, working on the 200th anniversary of Frankenstein, literary scholars and poet Fiona Sampson asks, why hasn't Mary Shelley gotten the respect she deserves? So, let's talk about Bath and Marlowe now. On their return back to England in September 1816, Mary and Percy moved with Claire, who took lodgings nearby, to Bath, where she hoped to keep Claire's pregnancy a secret. It was there Mary had received two letters from her half-sister Fanny M. May, who alluded to her unhappy life. On October 9th, Fanny wrote an alarming letter from Bristol and sent Percy Shelley racing off in search for her without success. On the morning of October 10th, Fanny Imlay was found dead in her own room at Swansea Sea, along with a suicide note in a lantern bottle. On December 10th, Percy Shelley's wife, Harriet, was discovered to have been drowned in serpentine in a lake near Hyde Park, London. Both suicides were hushed up, but Harriet's family obstructed Percy Shelley's efforts to assume custody of his two children by Harriet. His lawyers advised him to improve his case by marrying, so he and Mary, who was pregnant again, also married December 13, 1816, at St. Mildred Church. Her father gave consent to the marriage as required by a minor age. Under 21, Mr. and Mrs. Godwin were present at the witnessing, and Claire gave birth to a baby girl on January 13th, at first called Alba, later Allegra. In March of that year, the Chancery Court ruled that Percy Shelley was morally unfit to assume custody of the children, and will place them with the clergy's family. Early in the summer of 1817, Mary Shelley published Frankenstein, which was published anonymously in January 1818, and reviewers of the Rose assumed that Percy was the author since the book was published with a preface dedicated to the political hero William Godwin.